In a forgotten corner of Texas, a man rolled through life alone until one broken dog changed everything. This is the story of Jake and Ranger, a war hero who lost everything, a German shepherd left to die, and the bond that turned tragedy into triumph. Stay with us as we journey through pain, healing, and the power of second chances. Scene 1. The fateful encounter in the woods. The late afternoon sun scorched the dusty trail as Jake Martin wheeled his chair slowly along the edge of Mason Woods, sweat clinging to his back. It was supposed to be a routine outing, a part of the exercise his therapist insisted on. But that day, something felt different. Beneath the chorus of cicadas and the distant hum of a crop duster, he heard it, faint, raspy, almost too soft to notice. A whimper. He stopped, heart pounding, instincts sharpened from years in combat. "Hello," he called out. The sound came again, weaker this time. Driven by something deeper than curiosity, Jake veered off the path, maneuvering through sandy soil and tangled roots with determination. Every push of his wheels was a battle, but he pressed on. Then he saw it. In a clearing chained to a rusted metal stake lay a German shepherd. The dog's fur was filthy and matted, ribs jutting out like scaffolding beneath his dull coat. The chain had worn raw rings into his neck, leaving bloody, crusted wounds. Flies hovered, but the dog didn't even twitch. Their eyes met, one pair dulled by suffering, the other wide with shock and recognition. Jake whispered hoarsely, "Who did this to you?" In that moment, something passed between them. Two broken souls, both abandoned, both surviving. Jake gripped the arms of his wheelchair, jaw clenched with silent resolve. This dog would not die here, not alone, not forgotten. Scene 2. Jake's painful past. Long before the wheelchair defined his world, Jake Martin was known for something rare. A quiet gift with military working dogs. At just 32, he was the handler everyone trusted, able to calm the most anxious Malinois or guide the most stubborn shepherd with nothing more than a low murmur and a subtle hand signal. His fellow soldiers often joked he was part wolf, but it wasn't magic, it was legacy. Jake's grandfather, a Vietnam vet who trained police dogs, had taught him the silent language of loyalty, trust, and understanding. "Dogs don't care about your rank," his grandfather used to say. "They care if your heart beats true." And Jake's heart had indeed beaten true. Through 3 tours in Afghanistan, countless patrols, and nights filled with more danger than rest. But everything changed one scorching Tuesday in Kandahar. The IED was buried deep, invisible even to the dogs trained to detect them. In a blinding flash, Jake lost 2 brothers in arms and the use of his legs. But what the explosion didn't take, grief eventually did. Sarah, his wife and high school sweetheart, had stayed by his side during rehab, always smiling, even when shadows circled under her eyes. "We'll get through this," she promised, fingers entwined with his. "We'll get that German shepherd, just like we always dreamed." But fate had other plans. A year to the day after he came home, Sarah passed away in her sleep from a hidden heart condition. Silently, suddenly. Now at 41, Jake lived alone at the edge of rural Texas in a cabin outfitted for a life with wheels, but not for the weight of sorrow. His days had become routine: coffee at dawn, therapy exercises, silence filled by books and the occasional call from his VA counselor. He told himself it was peace. But deep inside, a hollowness ached, a void where purpose once lived. Until that day in the woods, when a chained dog's cry shattered the stillness. Scene 3. The rescue and the beginning of healing. Jake knew he couldn't free the dog right then, not without tools. The chain was thick, industrial grade, secured by a rusted padlock driven deep into the earth. It was too much for him to handle alone, especially from his seated position. But what haunted him most wasn't the chain, it was the dog's eyes, tired, full of pain, yet clinging to the tiniest flicker of hope. "I'll be back," Jake promised, pouring water into a bottle cap and placing it near the shepherd's muzzle. He tore a protein bar in half, laying a piece beside the water. The dog didn't move, just watched him with weary acceptance. Would he believe that this human, unlike the last, would return? Jake rolled back home, breathless but driven by purpose he hadn't felt in years. He strapped bolt cutters to his chair and returned before dusk. With trembling arms and aching shoulders, he broke the chain and gently gathered the limp dog into his lap. The journey back was excruciating, Jake's strength failing, the dog barely conscious, but when they reached the cabin, something shifted. They had crossed a line, together. Inside, Jake turned his dining room into a recovery space. He laid blankets by the wood stove, warmed water, cleaned the raw wounds around the dog's neck, and cut away the matted fur. The shepherd didn't resist. He didn't growl or cower. He simply watched Jake with quiet eyes, as if evaluating whether he was safe or finally home. That night, Jake whispered over and over, "You're safe now." Maybe to reassure the dog, maybe to reassure himself. The local vet couldn't come until morning, but guided Jake over the phone. Keep him warm, don't force food, offer water. Jake slept nearby, waking every hour. By morning, the dog had drunk a little but still wouldn't eat. Dr. Reeves arrived and confirmed what Jake feared: severe malnutrition, infected wounds, but no broken bones. Healing would take weeks, trust even longer. But for the first time in years, Jake wasn't just surviving, he was fighting for someone else. Scene 4. A bond begins and change follows. In the quiet days that followed, a fragile rhythm began to take shape. Jake fed the shepherd by hand, tiny pieces at a time. The dog, still unnamed, would only eat if Jake avoided eye contact. Any sudden movement made him flinch, but each small victory, a sip of water, a few bites of food, a moment of trust, was a triumph. By the 5th day, the dog no longer turned away when Jake entered the room. On the 7th, his eyes followed Jake's every move. On the 9th, Jake swore he saw the tip of that battle-worn tail twitch at the sight of breakfast. One evening, as twilight filtered through the cabin windows, Jake sat beside the shepherd and opened his favorite old book, The Old Man and the Sea. He read aloud, his voice steady, while the dog rested his chin on folded paws, listening. Somewhere in that stillness, Jake smiled. "I should give you a name," he murmured. "Something strong, something worthy." He studied the shepherd thoughtfully. "How about Ranger? Military enough for a dignified guy like you." The dog blinked slowly, as if granting quiet approval. That evening, Jake wheeled into the kitchen. For the first time, he heard it, the soft click of paws on hardwood behind him. He didn't turn around, afraid the moment would vanish, but inside something long dormant stirred, a flicker of accomplishment. As days turned to weeks, the two developed a routine. Ranger would watch Jake's physical therapy each morning with quiet intensity. When Jake worked on property improvements, he found himself planning for two: a fenced yard, smoother paths for his chair. More surprising was Jake himself. He began setting an alarm again, ordered groceries in bulk, spoke Sarah's name aloud for the first time in months. It wasn't just Ranger who was healing, it was both of them. Scene 5, conflict at the fence line. The peace Jake and Ranger had built was soon tested. It started one crisp November morning as they returned from their daily mailbox run. A muddy pickup truck skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust, and from behind the wheel, Bill Thompson, Jake's nearest neighbor, leaned out, face darkened by suspicion. "That your dog?" he barked, jerking his chin toward Ranger, who instinctively stepped between Jake's wheelchair and the truck. "Yes," Jake replied evenly, resting a hand on Ranger's back. "2 of my chickens turned up dead this morning. Looks like dog work to me." Jake's stomach twisted. "That's impossible. Ranger hasn't left my sight in months, and he sleeps inside." "He's a German shepherd, ain't he?" Bill narrowed his eyes. Big tracks near the coop. Could have been him. There are coyotes all over these woods, Jake countered, keeping his voice calm. And Ranger's trained. He doesn't run free. Bill spat onto the ground. Well, the county's got leash laws, and frankly, a man in your, condition, he glanced down at the wheelchair, ought not be keeping a dangerous animal. With that, the truck roared off, leaving Jake and Ranger in a haze of kicked-up dirt. Ranger remained motionless, muscles taut beneath Jake's hand. That night, Jake checked every door twice. He knew the accusation was false, but the weight of it lingered. Was his bond with Ranger being judged because he couldn't stand on two legs? Unable to sleep, Jake opened his laptop and began typing. He poured out the story, the rescue, the healing, the misunderstanding. He titled the post Pause and Purpose and hit publish, not expecting anyone to read it. But by morning, comments poured in, veterans, neighbors, even trainers, support, encouragement. A spark had been lit. The world was starting to listen, and for the first time, Jake didn't feel invisible. Scene 6. Through the fire. It was just after midnight when Jake felt a cold nose nudging his arm. Ranger stood beside the bed, unusually restless, ears alert. A low whine escaped him. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked groggily, reaching for the lamp. But before his fingers touched the switch, Ranger let out a sharp bark, urgent, insistent, and tugged at Jake's sleeve. Then Jake smelled it. Smoke. Heart pounding, he slid into his wheelchair and followed Ranger through the dim hallway. The air was thick, acrid. In the living room, flames were already climbing the wall near an old outlet. The wood paneling, dry from years of Texas summers, crackled with growing fury. Jake's training kicked in. He reached for the fire extinguisher in the kitchen, but it was too late. The fire had spread too fast. The front door was closer, but the flames were moving in that direction. Their only hope was the back exit. With smoke stinging his eyes and his lungs burning, Jake pushed toward the rear door. Ranger pressed against the wheelchair, guiding it like a second set of instincts. Jake's fingers fumbled with the lock, trembling with panic and pain. Then Ranger surged forward, his body weight slamming into the panic bar Jake had installed months ago for accessibility. The door burst open. Cold night air rushed in. They made it. Down the ramp, past the yard, all the way to the oak tree at the edge of the property. There, Jake finally turned to look, his home engulfed in orange, devouring the past 3 years of solitude and survival. Beside him, Ranger leaned in, warm and steady. Jake buried his fingers in the shepherd's fur, voice trembling. "Good boy. You saved my life." Tears came freely now, not just from smoke, but from the overwhelming truth. He wasn't alone anymore. Scene 7. When pain struck, Ranger answered. 3 weeks after the fire, Jake was still living in a cramped rental cabin offered by the local VFW. It was smaller, harder to navigate with his chair, and unfamiliar enough to keep sleep at bay. That night, just before dawn, the pain returned. It came without warning, a bolt of lightning tearing through his spine, radiating into limbs that no longer existed but still screamed with ghostly agony. His body seized, breath trapped in his chest. The emergency medication, his last line of defense, sat in a black case on the dresser, agonizingly out of reach. He tried to call out, but no sound came. Panic set in. Then Ranger moved. The German shepherd leapt from his bed and rushed to Jake's side. His eyes scanned the room, reading the signs. Jake's rigid body, clenched jaw, shallow gasps. Without being told, Ranger turned, trotted to the dresser, and gently took the case in his mouth. He brought it to Jake's bedside, laying it down with care. Jake fumbled with trembling fingers, struggling to unzip the pouch. Ranger leaned forward again, tugging the zipper with his teeth until it opened. Inside was the pre-filled syringe. With effort, Jake injected the medication into his thigh and collapsed back, chest heaving. Ranger didn't move. He pressed close, laying his head softly across Jake's chest, steady, present, anchoring him through the worst of it. "You incredible dog," Jake whispered. When he could finally speak, running his fingers through Ranger's fur. "What did I do to deserve you?" By morning, word of Ranger's act had spread. A VA staffer shared it in a meeting, a national service dog organization called. But to Jake, all that mattered was this. In his darkest hour, without a command, Ranger had chosen to save him again, not out of training, but out of love. Scene 8. A choice of the heart. The call came on a quiet February morning. Maria Cortez, director of Second Chance Guardians, a renowned organization that trained elite service dogs for veterans, had heard about Ranger. "Sergeant Martin," she said, "Ranger isn't just special. He's extraordinary. His instincts, intelligence, his bond with you. We believe he could help countless other veterans by becoming a training model at our national facility." Her proposal was generous. Ranger would live in Colorado, have expert care, acres to run, and become part of a program that would give dozens, maybe hundreds, of dogs and veterans a second chance. Jake listened in silence, heart heavy. He wanted to say yes, for the greater good, and eventually he did. He packed Ranger's supplies, the special bed, favorite toys, and an old t-shirt Jake wore to help Ranger sleep. On the morning of departure, a white van pulled into the driveway. The handler, kind and professional, knelt to greet Ranger. Jake gave the command they had practiced so many times: truck. Ranger took 2 steps toward the van, then stopped. With calm, deliberate motion, he turned, circled Jake's wheelchair once, and sat firmly at his side, head resting on Jake's knee, refusing to move. The message was undeniable. "I'm not going." Tears welled in Jake's eyes. After everything, after the chain, the fire, the pain, Ranger was choosing him, not the big facility, not the program, just Jake. The handler, visibly moved, stepped back. "I've never seen anything like that," he said softly. That evening, Maria called. They struck a new deal. Ranger would stay. The organization would rebuild Jake's burned home, transforming it into a regional training center. Jake would train dogs and veterans right here, with Ranger always by his side. They didn't need to be separated to serve others. They just needed to stay together. Scene 9. A legal storm brews. Spring was just beginning to touch the Texas countryside when the letter arrived. Formal, official-looking, with a law firm's name emblazoned across the top. Jake opened it with mild curiosity, but within seconds the words turned his blood cold. A couple, Robert and Diana Whitfield, were claiming ownership of Ranger. They said he was their missing dog, Duke, disappeared a year ago, and now, after seeing him on television, they wanted him back. Jake stared at the page in disbelief. Ranger? Their pet? The letter demanded Ranger's immediate return and hinted at legal action if Jake refused. He looked down at the dog lying peacefully at his feet, then back at the paper trembling in his hand. "They can't just take you," he whispered, but fear crept in. Jake contacted everyone he could: Maria Cortez at Second Chance Guardians, Dr. Reeves, his VA legal advisor. Maria moved quickly, connecting Jake with Elaine Jeffrey, a sharp-tongued attorney who specialized in service animal law. "They don't have a case," Elaine said confidently. "You found Ranger abandoned, injured. You've provided medical care, training, and he now functions as your service dog." Still, the Whitfields pressed forward, filing a formal petition in county court. They even appeared in local news, painting themselves as the heartbroken owners of a beloved pet. Public opinion began to fracture. Some believed their story. Others stood firmly with Jake. But the pressure was real. Jake lost sleep. Ranger, sensing the tension, became more protective, more withdrawn. He even began coughing, an ominous sound that sent Jake into spirals of worry. 3 days before the hearing, Ranger collapsed. He couldn't breathe. Jake rushed him to the vet, fear gripping his chest like a vice. Severe pneumonia, the vet confirmed, possibly linked to smoke inhalation from the fire. His condition? Serious. As Ranger lay in a kennel, hooked up to oxygen, Jake sat beside him, helpless. "They want to take you," he whispered through clenched teeth. "But you're mine, and I'll fight for you, whatever it takes." Scene 10. A soldier reclaimed. The courthouse was quiet that April morning, but inside Jake's chest a storm raged. Ranger was still in the veterinary clinic, breathing through a mask, fighting for his life, and now Jake stood alone in court, preparing to fight for Ranger's future. The Whitfields arrived looking every bit the grieving family. Their attorney painted a compelling story: a beloved dog named Duke, stolen, then found months later with a veteran who meant well but had no rightful claim. Jake clenched his fists beneath the table, heart aching with helplessness. Then the courtroom doors opened. Maria Cortez stepped in, flanked by a woman in uniform, Captain Jessica Fleming from the U.S. Army Veterinary Corps. She carried a leather portfolio and an expression of quiet confidence. With the judge's permission, Captain Fleming approached and laid out her findings. The German Shepherd known as Ranger matched the identifying features of a military working dog once known as K317, call name Rex. He had served with the 10th Mountain Division in Afghanistan. He'd gone missing after an ambush near Kandahar, presumed dead. But he wasn't, Fleming said. We never recovered the body, but we held a memorial. She laid out photographs, DNA results, and deployment records. The match was undeniable. The Whitfield's attorney fumbled. The documents they had submitted, the microchip data, the registration, were revealed to be falsified, their case unraveled before the court. The judge dismissed the petition with finality. That evening, Jake returned to the vet clinic, court papers still in hand. Ranger was sitting up now, eyes clearer. Jake knelt beside him, voice thick with emotion. "You were a soldier," he whispered, "just like me." Ranger leaned into his hand, eyes full of something unspoken but certain. Not just a dog, a brother in arms. A warrior come home. Scene 11. Rebuilding with purpose. The snow had barely melted when construction began. Thanks to Second Chance Guardians, Jake's old home, lost to fire, was being rebuilt, not just as a place to live, but as something greater. The new structure would include accessible training spaces, wide doorways, a veterinary room, and a wraparound porch overlooking a fenced field where dogs could run freely. They called it Second Chance's Ranch. Every nail driven into the walls, every ramp built, carried a new kind of weight, not just physical support, but symbolic healing. Jake was no longer just a veteran rebuilding after loss. He was a trainer, a mentor, a man rediscovering purpose with Ranger always by his side. Ranger, though still recovering from pneumonia, grew stronger each day. He walked with quiet dignity, his once scarred coat gleaming in the Texas sun. When visitors came, veterans, volunteers, curious neighbors, he moved among them with calm assurance, as if he understood he was part of something bigger now. Even Bill Thompson, the once bitter neighbor, showed up one morning in a worn flannel shirt, his speech still slow from his stroke. "Need help with the fencing?" he asked, sheepish but sincere. Jake nodded, no words needed. On Veterans Day, the ranch opened its gates. Families gathered. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder. Media cameras rolled as Jake rolled to the front of the crowd, Ranger at his side. He didn't read from his prepared notes. He simply spoke from the heart. "When I found Ranger," he said, "I thought I was saving him. But the truth is, we saved each other. This ranch is proof that healing isn't one way. Sometimes, rescue goes both directions." The crowd stood in quiet reverence. Behind Jake, the new buildings gleamed. In front of him, the future waited. And beside him, as always, stood the dog who refused to leave. Scene 12. A reunion years in the making. It was a warm spring afternoon when the dusty pickup truck pulled into the driveway of Second Chance's ranch. A tall man with a limp stepped out, military plates on his bumper, hesitation in his stride. Jake wheeled out onto the porch, Ranger at his side as always. "Can I help you?" Jake asked. The man nodded slowly. "Name's Michael Reynolds. I served with the 10th Mountain Division. I think I knew your dog." Ranger froze. Reynolds stepped forward, lowering himself onto one knee with effort, his eyes locked on Ranger's. "In Kandahar they called him Rex," he said softly. "He saved my life, me and 3 others. Detected a secondary IED before it blew, But in the chaos, he disappeared. We thought he'd died. Ranger moved closer, sniffing the man's hand. There was no hesitation, no fear, only recognition. "He remembers," Jake said quietly, watching the two soldiers reconnect. "He really remembers." Reynolds nodded, tears misting in his eyes. "We held a memorial for him. His name's on the K9 honor wall at Fort Drum. We never thought we'd see him again." The two men sat together on the porch, the weight of years and war between them, silent but understood. "He's been serving ever since," Jake added, stroking Ranger's back. "Just in a different way now." Reynolds looked around the ranch, the ramps, the training yards, the signs of healing everywhere. "You built all this with him?" Jake nodded. "We did, one day at a time." A long pause. Then Reynolds smiled. "Well, looks like Rex found his mission after all." Ranger lay down between them, eyes half closed, content. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a soldier, a healer, and a bridge between worlds. And today that bridge had led someone else home. Scene 13, the symbol of healing. As summer settled over Texas, Second Chance's ranch blossomed into something more than Jake had ever imagined. What began as a promise between a man and a dog had grown into a sanctuary, one where broken bodies and wounded hearts came to heal. Ranger became the heart of it all. Veterans arrived weekly, some in wheelchairs, others with invisible wounds, and each time Ranger greeted them with quiet presence, never forcing trust, only offering it. His scarred neck and steady gaze told a story more powerful than words ever could. Media outlets took notice. A national magazine featured Jake and Ranger on the cover, beneath the headline, "Unbreakable Bond, How a Paralyzed Veteran and an Abandoned Dog Rewrote the Rules of Recovery." Letters poured in, donations, volunteers, more veterans seeking not just service dogs but connection. But for Jake, the real miracle was quieter. He watched Ranger guiding a young amputee through his first trust exercise. He saw the glimmer in a PTSD survivor's eyes when Ranger rested his head in their lap. He heard laughter on the porch again, real, unguarded, human. And late at night, when all was still, Jake would sit beside Ranger under the porch light, fingers idly tracing the scar that once marked a life of pain. "You did this," he'd whisper. "You brought us all back." Ranger's tail would thump once, slow and certain. Healing, Jake had learned, wasn't about forgetting pain. It was about what came after, about choosing to live again, love again, even when it hurt. At Second Chance's ranch, that choice echoed in every paw print on the training field. And at the center of it all stood Ranger, not just a dog, not just a soldier, but a symbol of what's possible when we choose to begin again. Together. Scene 14, a new beginning. Twilight blanketed the ranch in golden light as Jake wheeled himself onto the porch, Ranger trotting faithfully beside him. The air smelled of honeysuckle and cut grass, and somewhere in the distance, two new trainees, Scout and Luna, chased butterflies along the fence line. The house was finally complete. Wide doorways, accessible workspaces, a training yard filled with purpose. What once was ash and ruin had become a haven for dogs, for veterans, and for something harder to define, renewal. Jake glanced down at Ranger, now resting beside his chair, ever alert. "You chose me," Jake whispered, reaching to scratch behind his ears. "After everything they did to you, you still chose me." And that, he realized, had made all the difference. Later that evening, Jake updated the blog, now the official voice of Second Chance's ranch. He responded to a message from a Marine captain about a young corporal recently injured and shutting out the world. Jake's reply was simple: "Bring him here. We'll be waiting." Before bed, he followed the familiar ritual. Ranger circled his spot at the foot of the bed 3 times before settling with a soft sigh. Jake smiled and turned off the light. Outside, rain tapped gently against the new metal roof. Inside, 2 souls rested, scarred but whole, no longer surviving, but living. Their story wasn't ending. It was just changing direction. And somewhere out there, more hearts waited to be healed by a place built from second chances and the bond that made it possible. They say not all wounds are visible. Jake and Ranger proved that not all healers wear white coats, and not all heroes walk on two legs. This isn't a story of rescue, it's a story of rebirth, because sometimes the soul you save is your own. And sometimes the one who saves you has 4 legs and a scar around his neck. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Let others know that healing is possible, that love has no rank, and that second chances can change everything.